recently arrived back in Java from Jakarta. Almost as soon as I see the mountains, my mind becomes clearer, and I believe that I create my best vlogs. Although the YouTube algorithm seems to believe the exact opposite. Not only can I think straight in the mountains, but I can generally get a good night's sleep. You see, I share my house in Jakarta with my two stepdaughters and a niece, all under 30. They don't seem to sleep at night and make a lot of noise, hence me being unable to sleep. Why do they stay awake at night? Is it the same phenomenon I experienced as a teenager? Undoubtedly in part, yes. But I cannot discount the impact their mobile phones has on them. Speaking to my neighbours in Jakarta, their children are also the same. And I have to admit that it's also a part of my problem, as when woken by the girls, I reach for my phone. Should I be concerned? Well, my oldest stepdaughter is frequently ill, always insisting on expensive visits to doctors, for which I have to pay. But the medical solutions never seem to work, or not for long, nor get to the root of the problem. Could we call this behaviour an addiction? After all, addiction is a category of mental disorders, of neuropsychological symptoms, or of merely maladaptive, harmful habits and lifestyles. A common use of addiction in medicine is for neuropsychological symptoms, denoting excessive and intense urges to engage in a category of behaviour towards sensory rewards, such as alcohol. I don't think I can say the word, begins with D, ends in S. I can't say the next word, begins in S, ends in X. Gambling, video gaming. Addictive disorders are mental disorders involving high intensities of addictions as neuropsychological symptoms that induce functional disabilities, i.e. they limit the subject's social, family and occupational activities. So it certainly seems to fit these common definitions of addictions. But should I be concerned? Could addiction be completely normal? Addiction seems to be a learned behaviour. It emerges in an environmental context. Thus is only of concern if we're concerned about it. It is developed and maintained by particular thought patterns and processes. So addiction seems to be related to our innate ability to recognise patterns. We might see this as a misplaced use of this ability. Thus, whenever we see such behaviour as a problem, whether we see such behaviour as a problem is very much a value judgment. Often we see addiction to narcotics and alcohol as a problem if they affect a person's ability to earn a living, or if it negatively affects others. But if addiction is normal, this is clearly a moral judgment. Perhaps I should reveal my own prejudice. That is, I firmly believe that before we meet God, or in my case Allah, it just means God anyway, but you know what I mean, we must all be free of all our addictions and compulsive behaviours. Of course, yes, I am a Muslim and probably have stronger views on addictive behaviour than many, although nothing like as strong as I'm portrayed in the Western media. But I should also reveal that my behaviour in the past has been close to what many would see as traditional addictions. Yes, I may rationalise this by pointing to the psychological pressure I have suffered at the hands of others, but aren't these excuses also indicative of my own ill-adaptation? around the 1920s, thanks to mass production and Fordism, Western economies could already produce enough to satisfy their population's needs. This shifted Western economies' problems from how to produce enough to how to sell their overproduction. In stepped Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, the American pioneer in the field of public relations and propaganda. Through advertising and public relations, he shifted consumption from being led by need to being led by desire. We're now all too familiar with these techniques and indeed how we have become slaves to them. How often do we convince ourselves that we need a product or service only to be deflated after the initial dopamine rush of the purchase? Our homes are crammed with cheap electronic devices, often made in China. We only a few years previously seemed essential to our lives, but are now redundant. This reveals another mechanism for selling overproduction, and that is inbuilt obsolescence. Few of us any longer are enticed to buy new phones for the latest features, but now inbuilt battery obsolescence and integrated batteries are the reason why we buy new phones. But the most disturbing trend is that of limbic capitalism. The purposive design, production and marketing of legal but health-demoting products that stimulate habitual consumption and pleasure for maximum profit. Thus my family's addiction to their phones fits this definition of limbic capitalism. I'm not attempting to suggest that addictive products are a new phenomena. No, many have been around since the beginning of time. But what seems to be new is the control and promotion of addiction by the few to the masses. Social media is accessed routinely through everyday digital devices. It aggressively intensifies limbic capitalism because it also works through embodied limbic processes. These platforms are designed to generate, analyse and apply vast amounts of personalised data in an effort to tune flows of online content, capture users' time and attention, and influence their effects, moods, emotions, and desires in order to increase profits. Social media is central to young people's socialising, identities, leisure practice, engagements in civic life. Young people actively appropriate social media for their own ends, but are simultaneously recruited as consumers who are separately targeted by producers of limbic products and services. Social media platforms have seen large increases in users and traffic through the health crisis, and limbic capitalism has worked to intensify marketing that is context, time and place specific, driving online purchases and deliveries of limbic products. How is our natural tendency for addiction manipulated by the limbic capitalists and increasingly our own governments and maybe overseas governments? Maybe synchronicity, but no sooner had I written this and a pop-up notification from Duolingo appeared on my phone, letting me know that I was in danger of being relegated. Now, I've lived in Indonesia for over 10 years and my Bahasa Indonesia is still woeful. There are many reasons for this, not least my own blockage in learning languages. But I've been putting in over an hour, often close to 2 hours, per day for over 4 years on Duolingo to learn Bahasa Indonesia. I was anticipating more advancement than I've experienced. And maybe I'm solely to blame, but Duolingo has become more of a gaming app than one which teaches its users a foreign language. I've been in danger of demolition for over a month, despite putting in more hours than I have ever before. Clearly, this is some form of psychological manipulation. I suspect I'm in a minority of 1% of the population, but when I spot such manipulation, I eventually walk away. Well, I do need to learn Bahasa and Indonesia, so I'll probably simply ignore the messages from Duolingo and use it when and as I want, freeing myself from the tyranny of learning at certain times every day and steering myself through lessons that I believe that I need. Indeed, should I not control my own learning? Not allow the needs of the advertisers to control my life? But does this illustrate how the behavioural techniques used in games are now found in almost all apps, social media, and indeed news feeds? Yes, we're being manipulated and addicted through almost everything we consume and engage in. What's worse, many of us are grown adults who should know much better. I remember going to a meeting in Manchester at the launch of a pyramid selling programme. Incidentally, if ever you go to one, you always know that they're pyramid selling because they spend quite a long time explaining to you that they're not. Once the meeting started, the doors were locked and we weren't allowed to use our own phones. The web-based product seemed impressive, but I couldn't identify how it was actually creating any wealth. As an owner of 3 web-based companies, I eventually concluded that it was a complete scam, which it was. So thinking of games, let us conceive of designing a gambling site. Maybe we'll base it on a game of roulette. We don't need to be a software engineer nor information expert to map out the logic for the site. Come on, try it. I promise you it's easy and it won't take long. Now, I doubt if many of you have engaged in this thought experiment. Not with constant notifications on your phone and a plethora of more interesting activities you do whilst watching YouTube. But I suspect that those few of you who did will have spotted what is important is replicating the feel of gambling on roulette wheels, not the actual probabilistic logic of playing roulette. Indeed, the probabilistic logic can be altered to whatever odds the company determines, including never allowing the user to win. So am I suggesting that under limbic capitalism the consumer always loses? Well, yes, I am. But it's a little more sophisticated than the example I've just constructed. After all, whilst I might be a minority for walking away from manipulation, if we extend this to the most obvious fraud, I would be joined by most of you. No, what is required is a system which keeps paying out enough to keep you playing, to get you addicted, to take all your money from you, thus maximising the profits of the site owner. Well, this is not far from exactly how limbic capitalism, how much of limbic capitalism works. But of course, all business owners have an obligation to maximise profits. Therefore, whilst their behaviour might seem unethical, its very assumptions behind the rule of law, which are ultimately at fault. So this very platform's algorithm is designed to keep you watching, to keep me creating, and keep advertisers advertising, all based on complex profit maximisation calculations. What should be apparent is that this is a long way from what we would consider to be a market or marketplace. The algorithm doesn't need to look at content in any sophisticated way as an educated consumer might, but just to look for clues on which content is likely to maximise the company's profits. This leads to a phenomena of going viral. The content which will maximise profits is promoted extensively, whilst most languish, not even paying the content creator a living wage. Hence we can see eBay and Amazon as being the exact opposite of a marketplace. Far from bringing buyers and sellers together with perfect knowledge, it again works to maximise eBay and Amazon's profits, regardless of its impact on the market they claim to be. Not only are we becoming addictive to this behavioural manipulation, but it's actually destroying what we have come to call capitalism. Thus, we are much closer to what Yanis Varoufakis describes as techno-feudalism. Should we blame the dreaded algorithms? Well, our direction is certainly being pointed towards them. And maybe that's the whole point of artificial intelligence, to obfuscate the business logic behind these decisions. How terribly convenient to have a black box whose logic cannot be readily interrogated. Yes, artificial intelligence has little to do with intelligence and everything to do with hegemony. Maybe a better title would be turbo hegemony, for that's what it is. Am I right to be concerned? Well, as I say, I belong to a minority of maybe only 1% who are concerned about psychological manipulation. Nevertheless, most of us are horrified when we know that we're being manipulated, and eventually most of us do walk away. Yes, behavioural program is designed to keep us playing, consuming, caring, whatever, but eventually we all turn off. But should we not all be concerned about the massive concentration of power in the hands of these new techno-feudalists, or techno-landlords, let's call them? Also about the massive inequalities it is creating, which seems to be being replicated by the increasing division and tribalism in society. All this appears to be with not only the support, but actively encouraged by our own governments. They increasingly use behavioural programming to adapt us to what they want us to believe. And under digital feudalism, the assumptions that we should be programmed, whose interests are they actually serving? Maybe you are happy with such developments, but surely we should be allowed to express our views and indeed have a voice in how society is developing. Indeed, without your voice being heard, we will eventually all walk away. Maybe this is exactly what needs to happen. After all, at school, we learn to isolate the cruel and manipulative children. But just maybe you feel you have a stake in this society and are concerned about what you see as lawless anarchy. Perhaps like me, such feelings have been brought on by a perception that things have gone a little too far. The manipulation and censorship just a little too intrusive. The greed, corruption and self-interest just a little too explicit. And an overwhelming feeling that I've been pushed too far and need to establish my own boundaries, however self-harming they may appear. Alarmist though this may seem, it mirrors how most people have been excluded and exclude themselves from society, never voting, never engaging in civil society, doing enough to get by, including taking what they can from those who are determined to take everything from them. What is alarmist is that I've lived my life dedicated to this civic society. I was a cog in the wheel which facilitated civic society. I'm sure that the liberals amongst you will say that I'm taking it too far in suggesting that change has to be fundamental. Well, I believe this has been foisted upon us. By removing the checks and balances and destroying those institutions which ensured consensus, we're left with the stark choice of supporting greed and manipulation or not. Remember, I taught business strategy at a major international business school. So even if I am feeling backed into an ideological corner, it illustrates the depth of our problems. Even if none of this concerns you, just maybe you're concerned about the behaviour of the children and what the future holds for them. Because it does keep me awake at night.